Hey Kim,
Hey, Jason.
it's great to see you.
You too.
Uh,
How are you doing?
I'm doing well. It's funny. I was talking to Brad the other day via Zoom, and it seems like this is the new normal I'm settling into. So I'm getting used to seeing my face on TV,
Yeah, me too.
which is weird. But I appreciate you joining me today and taking some time out of what I know is a busy schedule, coordinating everything remotely. But wanted to do a couple of talks around market, being in market, market message, and those types of things, just to kind of give a feel for what we know and sort of what we're learning as we go, through the market. We have a lot of outreach happening right now, and
Hmm.
we are learning every day, probably more than we have typically in the past. I mean, we've always consumed learnings, but it's much different right now. And so, as I mentioned, I was talking to Brad a couple of days ago regarding about the importance of being in market, right? But it's like when I talk about activity, right? It's good to have activity, but it's got to be the right activity. And it's great to be in market, but I think the critical piece we walked away with that was but you got to be in market with the right message, right? And so it's sparked my interest to say, well, as director of client services, that is your sole job. Well, not your sole, but it's mostly, your main focus. So I wanted to bring you in and just get some ideas around messaging and how do you create message and what it looks like and sort of the inner workings of the things that you deal with on a daily basis. So the first thing it would be like, if you had to pick three characteristics of messaging, what would you say those three characteristics are, and why are they important?
Yeah, so I think when you're thinking about messaging, it's important to recognize, first of all, that prospecting messaging is very different than broad go-to-market messaging. So you have to approach it with that mindset. And I think when you would try to identify characteristics, I think, first of all, it should focus on the business problems that a client solves for their clients rather than focusing on features and benefits. And the second thing is it's important to include a value proposition that speaks to a broad group of key stakeholders, but it can't be too detailed to disqualify us right at the beginning of outreach. And then I think the third characteristic that ideal prospecting messaging should have is it should lead with insight. And what that should do is compel a prospect to want to engage with us to learn more.
Sure, that makes sense. It's interesting as you get into prospecting and talk about messaging, and you mentioned something I always steer away from, which is the feature and benefits heavy outreach, because it can get you into that disqualification very, very quickly. And if you do address the problem that you solve, you tend to be able to navigate to people that can help you solve that internally. So that's a huge point. So that's one takeaway that I had. So thank you for sharing those. So now we know what it looks like. We know what a message should and shouldn't be when you're talking about prospecting. And every customer, every prospect, every client, every product, every service is different.
Mm-hmm.
And so are their competitors, right? And their unique differentiators we have to take into consideration. And as you go to market and think about the uniqueness of a problem that they solve, how do you get to that point of the translating their deeply rooted marketing message that they've no doubt spent tons of time and money on, and taking their collateral, their competitive views, all of that material. How do you get to the point where you can consume that and then regurgitate it back into a translated
Yeah.
message that does the three things that you just mentioned?
Yeah, yeah. So it's definitely a very collaborative process with our clients. And really, what we're trying to do is to align three things. We're trying to align the market, the message, and the messenger. So, first of all, it starts with us understanding what their target market is, who the key decision makers are within their desired target accounts, and also understanding what their unique solution is and the business challenges that they solve for their clients. And, you know, a lot of times when we start working with clients, they do lead with features and benefits, and they do lead with that general marketing message. And we try to steer them to thinking about what the specific business challenges are that they solve. So when they begin to think that way, oftentimes I find that there is just so much valuable information that they share with us that we then can take and include in our messaging. So it's also learning about their competitive landscape and what makes them different from everybody else. And then also having access to things like case studies and other customer testimonials are key. Having that voice of the customer is really, really important. So then what happens when we're armed with all of that information and all of that insight, we can begin to create messaging that is going to include all of those characteristics we talked about earlier.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, I mean, it's always important to understand what it is they do and how they do it and what problems they solve. But it, you know, part of that in the going back to the F&B heavy messaging, we tend to get ourselves into a situation where we're not consistent, and not being consistent doesn't allow for the highest amount of brand resonation and or amplification and awareness in the marketplace. But I think the other thing it does too is it gets us to that point. If we're not consistent and controlled in that delivery of the message that you have so masterfully created, then we tend to get into an elevator pitch mode, which is, we've all heard this, tell me why you're calling. And so part of your messaging really is to get as specific ask, right? And if you take that, tell me why that's important as we go through, you know, the delivery of the message. We've got the message, we've got the characteristics, we've consumed all the data, but as a delivery mechanism, as we're being in market, can you help explain why that consistency is so important?
Yeah, so this is where the importance of the messenger comes in. So there's two parts of the consistency. First of all, we want to build brand familiarity on behalf of our clients. So that occurs when we are repeating that same message, that same value proposition over a period of time. The second thing with consistency is it allows the folks who are doing the outreach on behalf of our clients to maintain control of the conversation. And it's important that they're asking for something that's very specific. It's a 20 to 30-minute phone conversation, or perhaps they're leveraging a referral to someone else in the organization. So the consistency revolves around those two key components. With respect to the brand familiarity, you know, we want to make sure that we are building that over time. And that's why I typically discourage clients from making changes in messaging until they've really had consistent feedback from the market and they understand how the value proposition is resonating. And that's very, very important. Now, certainly having said that, there's nothing wrong with making tweaks here and there along the way, but I really discourage wholesale changes to messaging for probably a good, you know, for the first 6 to 8 weeks.
Sure. Well, I think that's key too, because if you know, changes make inconsistencies happen, and you want to be as consistent as you can so you can learn. Because I think part of the problem with when we talk about being in market and being in market with the right message, part of the problem is people, they transition and shift too quickly. And when they don't see results, they'll change messaging or change the delivery of it or change a word here and there. And that dilutes your message as you go to market, correct?
Indeed. And it certainly can create confusion around your brand. And that's the last thing you want to do. That's
Right.
absolutely, you know, sort of the death knell to stay inconsistent, keeping that same messaging. And so that's why it's also so important for us to continue to work very collaboratively with our clients and then provide them insight based on the work that we've done across all of our client projects.
Yeah. So now we get to the question. You kind of leaned on it a little bit, but it's at what point, so you've got your message, you've got your in market, and the message is resonating. We know that we're getting some interactions happening. We understand we're being pushed through to some of the right personas. At what point and what lever do you pull to make optimization happen in a message? And so you talked about little tweaks here and there, but at what point do you look at it? And I know you said 6 weeks, but do you wait 6 weeks? If there's no results, at what point do you just completely dismantle and try to rebuild it? Or do you ever do that? Or do you just get to, you slide things in and slide things out, or dial up and dial down according to results?
Yeah, so there's a couple of different ways that we can do that. Certainly, depending on the different types of personas that we're reaching out to, we always want to include specific bullet points that would be relevant to the business challenges that those personas are dealing with on a daily basis. Again, not really making wholesale changes to a message, a value prop,
Sure.
unless for some unusual reason that we're getting absolutely no traction. And quite frankly, that just doesn't happen very often. And so it would be more around changing up some talking points rather than making wholesale changes to a value proposition. And again, until you get feedback from the market, you don't want to make any changes until you're armed with that type of insight.
Sure. No, that makes sense. So when you talk about going to market and you look at delivering the message, this is consistent across all outreaches, correct? I mean, if you were reaching socially, it would read similarly to verbal or electronic distribution of this message. Do you tweak it at all based on your outreach efforts?
Well, certainly you would want to include any intelligence that you uncover as you're having conversations with key decision makers within the organization. Perhaps you had a conversation with an admin and he or she provided you with some information around the specific key decision maker that you were trying to reach out to. The next time you followed up, you would certainly want to include that. And I think that's the beauty of our process is while we do maintain consistency with the message, our callers are so well versed in the solution that they're supporting on behalf of our client that they understand that they can make little tweaks. And what happens is it does help them be genuine and help them be sincere and authentic in their outreach. And they're able to build rapport with the folks in those organizations and continue to build that brand familiarity.
Yeah, well, it makes sense. You said earlier, right, that you wanted to leverage insights. That's one of the characteristics. And if you're building relationships and, a chronological map or trail of how you got to someone, you want to be able to leverage all of that. That would be included, in my opinion, be included in the category of insights, right? How did you get to me? Well, I talked to Kim. And give a little backstory there. So that makes perfect sense to stay consistent with delivering some insightful information in the messaging. So as we look at being in market and being in market with the message that matters and a message that resonates and the right messaging and being able to optimize the message and all the things we talked about, to summarize, and feel free to keep me honest here and add or correct, which I'm sure it'll be the latter. If you look at the 3 characteristics, right, it's got to be focused on a business problem that you solve. It needs to be value proposition needs to be wide ranged enough to be relevant and touch to several different personas within the organization. And then the last piece is it needs to lead with some insights, right? And then once that's done, you're able to consume all of the competitive landscape data. You're able to digest all of the value propositions, the features and benefits, challenges that these folks are facing in outreach and in closing business, along with including personas. And then that message can then be created and market entry can then happen. And as learnings take place, we'd be able to optimize or maintain course if it's working. Is there anything else you would summarize and add in that recap?
Yeah, I think that's a good recap. The only thing I might add is that, it continues to evolve and be a very collaborative process with our clients. They look to us to provide them with insight around what we see across our client projects. And so oftentimes they will ask us specifically, hey, how does this compare? How are we doing? And then the other key thing is, because they are able to get direct feedback through some of the reporting and some of the other the value that we provide around that feedback from us, they can then take that and have a word-for-word transcription, hear the voice of the customer, see how the market is responding, learn things about their competitors that they may not have known before. And so they're always uncovering additional key insights. And I think that that's really, really important to our clients. And that's why they view us as a really valuable partner.
Yeah, I agree with you. You said something that's interesting, so I don't mean to add another bullet point to this, but going back to the consistency piece, and we all believe that our buyer is persona X, but that may not be the case. And doesn't consistent messaging and the delivery of that messaging allow us to learn who our actual buyer may or may not be? Now, right? Go ahead.
For sure. No doubt about that. And the way we execute on this messaging, again, by having conversations with the admins within these accounts and validating that, the persona we may think is the key decision maker, but in fact, we may learn that that role and responsibility owner could well be someone else within that organization. So again, having something very specific that we're asking for when we're calling, we're asking for a 20 to 30 minute phone conversation to talk about whatever the value proposition is. And again, we may think we know who the individual is, but we find out by navigating to multiple people within the organization, we do get directed to the right role and responsibility owner.
Yeah. And you can't do that without consistency, right?
Right.
If you change it every time you reach out to somebody new, no one's ever going to connect the dots. So
correct. Yeah.
Yeah, that's important. Well, look, I know you've got other things to get to. We're running up on about 20 minutes, but I just wanted to say thank you. It's great to see you. I can't wait to get back in the office sometime in the future and be able to see you in person, but this will have to do for now. So thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, same here. And thanks for having me. Have a great day.
You too, Kim. Thanks.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.